This is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I am going to start a reading of The Life of Charlotte Brontë by Elizabeth Gaskell. The Leeds and Bradford Railway runs along a deep valley of the Ure, a slow and sluggish stream compared to the neighbouring river of Haworth. Keighley station is on this line of railway, about a quarter of a mile from the town of the same name. The number of inhabitants and the importance of Keighley have been very greatly increased during the last 20 years, owing to the rapidly extended market for worsted manufacturers, a branch of industry that mainly employs the factory population of this part of Yorkshire, which has Bradford for its centre and metropolis. Keighley is in process of transformation from a populous old-fashioned village into a still more populous and flourishing town. It is evident to the stranger that as the gable-ended houses, which obtrude themselves cornerwise on the widening street, fall vacant, they are pulled down to allow a greater space for traffic and a more modern style of architecture. The quaint and narrow shop windows of 50 years ago are giving way to large panes and plate glass. Nearly every dwelling seems devoted to some branch of commerce. In passing hastily through the town, one hardly perceives where the necessary lawyer and doctor can live, so little appearance is there of any dwellings of the professional middle class, such as abound in our old cathedral towns. In fact, nothing can be more opposed than the state of society, the modes of thinking, the standards of reference on all points of morality, manners, and even politics and religion, in such a new manufacturing place as Keighley in the north, and any stately, sleepy, picturesque cathedral town in the south. Yet the aspect of Keighley promises well for future stateliness, if not picturesqueness. Grey stone abounds, and the rows of houses built of it have a kind of solid grandeur, connected with their uniform and enduring lines. The framework of the doors and the lintels of the windows, even in the smallest dwellings, are made of blocks of stone. There is no painted wood to require continual beautifying, or else present a shabby aspect, and the stone is kept scrupulously clean by the notable Yorkshire housewives. Such glimpses into the interior as a passer-by obtains reveal a rough abundance of the means of living and diligent and active habits in the women, but the voices of the people are hard and their tones discordant, promising little of the musical taste that distinguishes the district and which has already furnished a caratus to the musical world. The names over the shops, of which the one just given is a sample, seem strange even to an inhabitant of the neighbouring county, and have a peculiar smack and flavour of the place. The town of Keighley never quite melts into country on the road to Haworth, although the houses become more sparse as the traveller journeys upwards to the grey round hills that seem to bound his journey in a westerly direction. First come some villas, just sufficiently retired from the road to show that they can scarcely belong to anyone liable to be summoned in a hurry at the call of suffering or danger. From his comfortable fireside, the lawyer, the doctor, and the clergyman live at hand, and hardly in the suburbs, with a screen of shrubs for concealment. In a town one does not look for vivid colouring. What there may be of this is furnished by the wares in the distance is about 4 miles, and as I have said, what with villas, great worsted factories, rows of workmen's houses, with here and there an old-fashioned farmhouse and outbuildings, it can hardly be called country any part of the way. For 2 miles the road passes over tolerably level ground, distant hills on the left, a beck flowing through meadows on the right, and furnishing water power at certain points to the factories built on its banks. The air is dim and lightless with the smoke from all these habitations and places of business. The soil in the valley, or bottom to use the local term, is rich, but as the road begins to ascend, the vegetation becomes poorer. It does not flourish, it merely exists, and instead of trees there are only bushes and shrubs about the dwellings. Stone dykes are everywhere used in place of hedges, and what crops there are on the patches of arable land consist of pale, hungry-looking grey-green oats. Right before the traveller on this road rises Haworth village. He can see it for 2 miles before he arrives, for it is situated on the side of a pretty steep hill, with a background of dun and purple moors, rising and sweeping away yet higher than the church, which is built at the very summit of the long, narrow street. All round the horizon there is this same line of sinuous wave-like hills, the scoops into which they fall only revealing other hills beyond, of similar colour and shape, crowned with wild, bleak moors, grand, from the ideas of solitude and loneliness which they suggest, or oppressive from the feeling which they give of being pent up by some monotonous and illimitable barrier, according to the mood of mind in which the spectator may be. For a short distance the road appears to turn away from Haworth, as it winds round the base of the shoulder of a hill, but then it crosses a bridge over the beck, and the ascent through the village begins. The flagstones with which it is paved are placed endways, in order to give a better hold to the horses' feet, and even with this help they seem to be in constant danger of slipping backwards. The old stone houses are high compared to the width of the street, which makes an abrupt turn before reaching the more level ground at the head of the village, so that the steep aspect of the place, in one part, is almost like that of a wall. But this surmounted, the church lies a little off the main road on the left, 100 yards or so, and the driver relaxes his care, and the horse breathes more easily as they pass into the quiet little by-street that leads to Haworth Parsonage. The churchyard is on one side of this lane, the schoolhouse and the sexton's dwelling, where the curates formerly lodged, on the other. The parsonage stands at right angles to the road, facing down upon the church, so that in fact parsonage, church and belfried schoolhouse form 3 sides of an irregular oblong, of which the 4th is open to the fields and moors that lie beyond. The area of this oblong is filled up by a crowded churchyard and a small garden or court in front of the clergyman's house. As the entrance to this from the road is at the side, the path goes round the corner into the little plot of ground. Underneath the windows is a narrow flower border, carefully tended in days of yore, although only the most hardy plants could be made to grow there. Within the stone wall, which keeps out the surrounding churchyard, are bushes of elder and lilac. The rest of the ground is occupied by a square grass plot and a gravel walk. The house is of grey stone, 2 stories high, heavily roofed with flags, in order to resist the winds that might strip off a lighter covering. It appears to have been built about 100 years ago, and to consist of 4 rooms on each story. The 2 windows on the right, as the visitor stands with his back to the church, ready to enter in at the front door, belonging to Mr Bronte's study, the 2 on the left to the family sitting room. Everything about the place tells of the most dainty order, the most exquisite cleanliness. The doorsteps are spotless, the small old-fashioned window panes glitter like looking glass. Inside and outside of that house, cleanliness goes up into its essence, purity. The little church lies, as I mentioned, above most of the houses in the village, and the graveyard rises above the church and is terribly full of upright tombstones. The chapel or church claims greater antiquity than any other in that part of the kingdom, but there is no appearance of this in the external aspect of the present edifice, unless it be in the 2 eastern windows, which remain unmodernised, and in the lower part of the steeple. Inside, the character of the pillars show that they were constructed before the reign of Henry VII. It is probable that there existed on this ground a field kirk or oratory in the earliest times, and from the Archbishop's registry at York it is ascertained that there was a chapel at Haworth in 1317. The inhabitants refer inquirers concerning the date to the following inscription on a stone in the church tower: Hic fecit canabium monachorum ortest fundator AD sexcentissimo. That is to say, before the preaching of Christianity in Northumbria. Whitaker says that this mistake originated in the illiterate copying out by some modern stone cutter of an inscription in the character of Henry VIII's time on an adjoining stone: Orate pro bono statue utest Todd. Now every antiquary knows that the formula of prayer, bono, statue, always refers to the living. I suspect this singular Christian name has been mistaken by the stone cutter for Orsted, a contraction of Eustachius, but the word Todd, which has been misread from the Arabic figures 600, is perfectly fair and legible. On the resumption of this foolish claim to antiquity, the people would need set up for independence and contest the right of the vicar at Bradford to nominate a curate at Haworth. I have given this extract in order to explain the imaginary groundwork of a commotion which took place in Haworth about 35 years ago, to which I shall have occasion to allude again more particularly. The interior of the church is commonplace. It is neither old enough nor modern enough to compel notice. The pews are of black oak with high divisions, and the names of those to whom they belong are painted in white letters on the door. There are neither brasses, nor altar tombs, nor monuments, but there is a mural tablet on the right-hand side of the communion table bearing the following inscription: Here lie the remains of Maria Bronte, wife of the Reverend P. Brontë, A.B., Minister of Haworth. Her soul departed to the Saviour, September 15th, 1821, in the 39th year of her age. Be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh. Matthew 24:44. And here lie the remains of Maria Bronte, daughter of the aforesaid. She died on the 6th of May 1825 in the 12th year of her age, and of Elizabeth Brontë, her sister, who died June the 15th, 1825 in the 11th year of her age. Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:8. Here also lie the remains of Patrick Branwell Brontë, who died September 24th, 1848, aged 30 years, and of Emily Jane Brontë, who died December 19th, 1848, aged 29 years, son and daughter of the Reverend P. Brontë, incumbent. This stone is also dedicated to the memory of Anne Brontë, youngest daughter of the Reverend P. Brontë, A.B. She died aged 27 years, May the 28th, 1849, and was buried at the Old Church, Scarborough. At the upper part of this tablet ample space is allowed between the lines of the inscription when the first memorials were written down. The survivors, in their fond affection, thought little of the margin and verge they were leaving for those who were still living. But as one dead member of the household follows another fast to the grave, the lines are pressed together and the letters become small and cramped. After the record of Anne's death, there is room for no other. But one more of that generation, the last of that nursery of 6 little motherless children, was yet to follow before the survivor, the childless and widowed father, found his rest. On another tablet below the first, the following record has been added to that mournful list. Adjoining lie the remains of Charlotte, wife of the Reverend Arthur Bell Nichols, A.B., and daughter of the Reverend P. Brontë, A.B., incumbent. She died March 31st, 1855, in the 39th year of her age. Chapter 2. For a right understanding of the life of my dear friend Charlotte Brontë, it appears to me more necessary in her case than in most others that the reader should be made acquainted with the peculiar forms of population and society amidst which her earliest years were passed, and from which both her own and her sister's first impressions of human life must have been received. I shall endeavour, therefore, before proceeding further with my work, to present some idea of the character of the people of Haworth and the surrounding districts. Even an inhabitant of the neighbouring county of Lancaster is struck by the peculiar force of character which the Yorkshiremen display. This makes them interesting as a race, while, at the same time, as individuals, the remarkable degree of self-sufficiency they possess gives them an air of independence rather apt to repel a stranger. I use this expression self-sufficiency in the largest sense, conscious of the strong sagacity and the dogged power of will which seem almost the birthright of the natives of the West Riding. Each man relies upon himself and seeks no help at the hands of his neighbour. From rarely requiring the assistance of others, he comes to doubt the power of bestowing it. From the general success of his efforts, he grows to depend upon them, and to overesteem his own energy and power. He belongs to that keen, yet short-sighted class, who consider suspicion of all whose honesty is not proved as a sign of wisdom. The practical qualities of a man are held in great respect, but the want of faith in strangers and untried modes of action extends itself even to the manner in which the virtues are regarded, and if they produce no immediate and tangible result, they are rather aside as unfit for this busy, striving world, especially if they are more of a passive than an active character. The affections are strong, and their foundations lie deep, but they are not. Such affections seldom are widespreading, nor do they show themselves on the surface. Indeed, there is little display of any of the amenities of life among this wild, rough population. Their accost is curt, their accent and tone of speech blunt and harsh. Something of this may probably be attributed to the freedom of mountain air and of isolated hillside life. Something can be derived from their rough Norse ancestry. They have a quick perception of character and a keen sense of humour. The dwellers among them must be prepared for certain uncomplimentary, though most likely true observations, pithily expressed. Their feelings are not easily roused, but their duration is lasting. Hence there is much close friendship and faithful service, and for a correct exemplification of the form in which the latter frequently appears, I need only refer the reader of Wuthering Heights to the character of Joseph. From the same cause come also enduring grudges, in some cases amounting to hatred, which occasionally has been bequeathed from generation to generation. I remember Miss Brontë once telling me that it was a saying round about Haworth, "Keep a stone in thy pocket 7 year, turn it and keep it 7 year longer, that it may be ever ready to thine hand when thine enemy draws near." The West Riding men are sleuth hounds in pursuit of money. Miss Brontë related to my husband a curious instance illustrative of this eager desire for riches. A man that she knew, who was a small manufacturer, had engaged in many local speculations, which had always turned out well, and thereby rendered him a person of some wealth. He was rather past middle age when he bethought him of insuring his life, and he had only just taken out his policy when he fell ill of an acute disease, which was certain to end fatally in a very few days. The doctor, half hesitatingly, revealed to him his hopeless state. "By Jingo," cried he, rousing up at once into the old energy, "I shall do the insurance company. I always was a lucky fellow." These men are keen and shrewd, faithful and persevering in following out a good purpose, fell in tracking an evil one. They are not emotional, they are not easily made into either friends or enemies, but once lovers or haters, it is difficult to change their feeling. They are a powerful race both in mind and body, both for good and for evil. The woolen manufacture was introduced into this district in the days of Edward III. It is traditionally said that a colony of Flemings came over and settled in the West Riding to teach the inhabitants what to do with their wool. The mixture of agricultural with manufacturing labour that ensued and prevailed in the West Riding up to a very recent period sounds pleasant enough at this distance of time, when the classical impression is left and the details forgotten, or only brought to light by those who explore the few remote parts of England where the custom still lingers. The idea of the mistress and her maidens spinning at the great wheels while the master was abroad, ploughing his fields, or seeing after his flocks on the purple moors, is very poetical to look back upon. But when such life actually touches on our own days, and we can hear particulars from the lips of those now living, details of coarseness, of the uncouthness of the rustic mingled with the sharpness of the tradesman, of irregularity and fierce lawlessness, come out, that rather mar the vision of pastoral innocence and simplicity. Still, as it is the exceptional and exaggerated characteristics of any period that leave the most vivid memory behind them, it would be wrong, in my opinion, faithless to conclude that such and such forms of society and modes of living were not best for the period when they prevailed, although the abuses they may have led into and the gradual progress of the world have made it well that such ways and manners should pass away forever, and as preposterous to attempt to return to them as it would be for a man to return to the clothes of his childhood. The patent granted to Alderman Cockayne and the further restrictions imposed by James I on the export of undyed woolen cloths, met by a prohibition on the part of the States of Holland of the import of English dyed cloths, injured the trade of the West Riding manufacturers considerably. Their independence of character, their dislike of authority, and their strong powers of thought predisposed them to rebellion against the religious dictations of such men as Laud and the arbitrary rule of the Stuarts, and the injury done by James and Charles to the trade by which they gained their bread made the great majority of them Commonwealth men. I shall have occasion afterwards to give one or two instances of the warm feelings and extensive knowledge on subjects of both home and foreign politics existing at the present day in the villages lying west and east of the mountainous ridge that separates Yorkshire and Lancashire, the inhabitants of which are of the same race and possess the same quality of character. The descendants of many who served under Cromwell at Dunbar live on the same lands as their ancestors occupied then, and perhaps there is no part of England where the traditional and fond recollections of the Commonwealth have lingered so long as in that inhabited by the woolen manufacturing population of the West Riding, who had the restrictions taken off their trade by the Protector's admirable commercial policy. I have it on good authority that not 30 years ago the phrase "in Oliver's days" was in common use to denote a time of unusual prosperity. The class of Christian names prevalent in a district is one indication of the direction in which its tide of hero worship sets. Grave enthusiasts in politics or religion perceive not the ludicrous side of those which they give to their children, and some are to be found still in their infancy, not a dozen miles from Haworth, that will have to go through life as Lamartine, Kossuth, and Dembinski. And so there is a testimony to what I have said of the traditional feeling of the district in the fact that the Old Testament names in general used among the Puritans are yet the prevalent appellations in most Yorkshire families of middle or humble rank, whatever their religious persuasion may be. There are numerous records, too, that show the kindly way in which the ejected ministers were received by the gentry, as well as by the poorer part of the inhabitants, during the persecuting days of Charles II. These little facts all testify to the old hereditary spirit of independence, ready ever to resist authority, which was conceived to be unjustly exercised, that distinguishes the people of the West Riding to the present day. The parish of Halifax touches that of Bradford, in which the chapelry of Haworth is included, and the nature of the ground in the two parishes is much of the same wild and hilly description. The abundance of coal and the number of mountain streams in the district make it highly favourable to manufacturers, and accordingly, as I stated accounts out of a memorial of one James Rither, living in the reign of Elizabeth, which is partially true to this day. They have no superior to court, no civilities to practice. A sour and sturdy humour is the consequence, so that a stranger is shocked by a tone of defiance in every voice and an air of fierceness in every countenance. Even now a stranger can hardly ask a question without receiving some crusty reply, if indeed he receive any at all. Sometimes the sour rudeness amounts to positive insult, yet if the foreigner takes all this churlishness good-humouredly or as a matter of course, and makes good any claim upon their latent kindliness and hospitality, they are faithful and generous and thoroughly to be relied upon. As a slight illustration of the roughness that pervades all classes in these out-of-the-way villages, I may relate a little adventure which happened to my husband and myself 3 years ago at Addingham. From Linton to Long Addingham, and all that Craven coasts did tell, etc. One of the places that sent forth its fighting men to the famous old battle of Flodden Field, and a village not many miles from Haworth. We were driving along the street when one of those ne'er-do-well lads who seemed to have a kind of magnetic power for misfortunes, having jumped into the stream that runs through the place, just where all the broken glass and bottles are thrown, staggered naked and nearly covered with blood into a cottage before us. Besides receiving another bad cut in the arm, he had completely laid open the artery and was in a fair way of bleeding to death, which one of his relations comforted him by saying would be likely to save a deal of trouble. When my husband had checked the effusion of blood with a strap that one of the bystanders unbuckled from his leg, he asked if a surgeon had been sent for. "Yoy," was the answer, "but we dunna think he'll come." "Why not?" "He's oud, you see, and asthmatic, and it's uphill." My husband, taking a boy for his guide, drove as fast as he could to the surgeon's house, which was about 3/4 of a mile off, and met the aunt of the wounded lad leaving it. "Is he coming?" inquired my husband. "Well, he didna say he wouldna come." "But tell him the lad may bleed to death." I did. "And what did he say?" "Why, only, damn him, what do I care?" It ended, however, in his sending one of his sons, who, though not brought up to the surgering trade, was able to do what was necessary in the way of bandages and plasters. The excuse made for the surgeon was that he was near 80 and getting a bit doited, and had had a matter of 20 childer. Among the most unmoved of the lookers-on was the brother of the boy so badly hurt, and while he was lying in a pool of blood on the flag floor and crying out how much his arm was watching, his stoical relation stood coolly smoking his bit of black pipe and uttered not a single word of either sympathy or sorrow. Forest customs, existing in the fringes of dark wood, which clothed the declivity of the hills on either side, tended to brutalise the population until the middle of the 17th century. Execution by beheading was performed in a summary way upon either men or women who were guilty of but very slight crimes, and a dogged yet in some cases fine indifference to human life was thus generated. The roads were so notoriously bad, even up to the last 30 years, that there was little communication between one village and another. If the produce of industry could be conveyed at stated times to the cloth market of the district, it was all that could be done, and in lonely houses on the distant hillside, or by the small magnates of secluded hamlets, crimes might be committed almost unknown, certainly without any great uprising of popular indignation, calculated to bring down the strong were most of them inclined to tolerate eccentricity and to wink at faults too much like their own. Men hardly past middle life talk of the days of their youth spent in this part of the country, when, during the winter months, they rode up to the saddle girths in mud, when absolute business was the only reason for stirring beyond the precincts of home, and when that business was conducted under a pressure of difficulties which they themselves borne along to Bradford Market in a swift first-class carriage can hardly believe to have been possible. For instance, one woollen manufacturer says that not 25 years ago he had to rise betimes to set off on a winter's morning in order to be at Bradford with the great waggon load of goods manufactured by his father. This load was packed overnight, but in the morning there was great gathering around it, and flashing of lanterns, and examination of horses' feet before the ponderous waggon got under way, and then someone had to go groping here and there on hands and knees, and always sounding with a staff down the long, steep, slippery brow, to find where the horses might tread safely, until they reached the comparative easy going of the deep-rutted main road. People went on horseback over the upland moors, following the tracks of the pack horses that carried the parcels, baggage, or goods from one town to another, between which there did not happen to be a highway. But in the winter all such communication was impossible, by reason of the snow which lay long and late on the bleak high ground. I have known people who, travelling by the mail coach over Blackstone Edge, had been snowed up for a week or 10 days at the little inn near the summit, and obliged to spend both Christmas and New Year's Day there, till the store of provisions laid in for the use of the landlord and his family falling short before the inroads of the unexpected visitors, they had recourse to the turkeys, geese, and Yorkshire pies with which the coach was laden, and even these were beginning to fail, when a fortunate thaw released them from their prison. Isolated as the hill villages may be, they are in the world compared with the loneliness of the grey ancestral houses to be seen here and there in the dense hollows of the moors. These dwellings are not large, yet they are solid and roomy enough for the accommodation of those who live in them, and to whom the surrounding estates belong. The land has often been held by one family since the days of the Tudors. The owners are, in fact, the remains of the old yeomanry, small squires, who are rapidly becoming extinct as a class from one or two causes. Either the possessor falls into idle drinking habits, and so is obliged eventually to sell his property, or he finds, if more shrewd and adventurous, that the beck running down the mountainside, or the minerals beneath his feet, can be turned into a new source of wealth, and leaving the old plodding life of a landowner with small capital, he turns manufacturer, or digs for coal, or quarries for stone. Still, there are those remaining of this class, dwellers in the lonely houses far away in the upland districts, even at the present day, who sufficiently indicate what strange eccentricity, what wild strength of will, nay, even what unnatural power of crime was fostered by a mode of living in which a man seldom met his fellows, and where public opinion was only a distant and inarticulate echo of some clearer voice sounding behind the sweeping horizon. A solitary life cherishes mere fancies until they become manias, and the powerful Yorkshire character, which was scarcely tamed into subjection by all the contact it met with in busy town or crowded mart, has before now broken out into strange wilfulness in the remoter districts. A singular account was recently given me as if his forefathers had been for a long time people of consideration. My informant was struck with the appearance of the place, and proposed to the countryman who was accompanying him to go up to it and take a nearer inspection. The reply was, "You'd better not, he'd threep you down the loan. He's let fly at some folks' legs and let shot lodge in 'em before now for going too near to his house," and finding on closer inquiry that such was really the inhospitable custom of this moorland squire, the gentleman gave up his purpose. I believe that the savage yeoman is still living. Another squire of more distinguished family and larger property, one is thence led to imagine of better education, but that does not always follow, died at his house, not many miles from Haworth, only a few years ago. His great amusement and occupation had been cock-fighting. When he was confined to his chamber with what he knew would be his last illness, he had his cocks brought up there and watched the bloody battle from his bed. As his mortal disease increased, and it became impossible for him to turn so as to follow the combat, he had looking-glasses arranged in such a manner around and above him as he lay that he could still see the cocks fighting, and in this manner he died. These are merely instances of eccentricity compared to the tales of positive violence and crime that have occurred in these isolated dwellings, which still linger in the memories of the old people of the district, and some of which were doubtless familiar to the authors of Wuthering Heights and the tenant of Wildfell Hall. The amusements of the lower classes could hardly be expected to be more humane than those of the wealthy and better educated. The gentleman who has kindly furnished me with some of the particulars I was given remembers the bull baitings at Rochdale not 30 years ago. The bull was fastened by a chain or rope to a post in the river to increase the amount of water, as well as to give their work people the opportunity of savage delight. The masters were accustomed to stop their mills on the day when the sport took place. The bull would sometimes wheel suddenly round, so that the rope by which he was fastened swept those who had been careless enough to come within its range down into the water, and the good people of Rochdale had the excitement of seeing one or two of their neighbours drowned, as well as of witnessing the bull baited and the dogs torn and tossed. The people of Haworth were not less strong and full of character than their neighbours on either side of the hill. The village lies embedded in the moors between the two counties, on the old road between Keighley and Colne. About the middle of the last century, it became famous in the religious world as the scene of the ministrations of the Reverend William Grimshaw, Curate of Haworth, for 20 years. Before this time, it is probable that the curates were of the same order as one Mr Nichols, a Yorkshire clergyman in the days immediately succeeding the Reformation, who was much addicted to drinking and company keeping, and used to say to his companions, "You must not heed me but when I am got 3 feet above the earth," that was, into the pulpit. Mr Grimshaw's life was written by Newton, Cowper's friend, and from it may be gathered some curious particulars of the manner in which a rough population was swayed and governed by a man of deep convictions and strong earnestness of purpose. It seems that he had not been in any way remarkable for religious zeal, though he had led a moral life and been conscientious in fulfilling He spoke to the congregation and told them not to disperse, as he had something to say to them, and would return presently. He was taken to the clerk's house, and again became insensible. His servant rubbed him to restore the circulation, and when he was brought to himself, he seemed in a great rapture, and the first words he uttered were, "I have a glorious vision from the third heaven." He did not say what he had seen, but returned into the church and began the service again at 2 in the afternoon, and went on until 7. From this time he devoted himself with the fervour of a Wesley, and something of the fanaticism of a Whitfield, to calling out a religious life among his parishioners. They had been in the habit of playing at football on Sunday, using stones for this purpose, and giving and receiving challenges from other parishes. There were horse races held on the moors just above the village, which were periodical sources of drunkenness and profligacy. Scarcely a wedding took place without the rough amusement of foot races, where the half-naked runners were a scandal to all decent strangers. The old custom of arvills, or funeral feasts, led to frequent pitched battles between the drunken mourners. Such customs were the outward signs of the kind of people with whom Mr Grimshaw had to deal. But by various means, some of the most practical kind, he wrought a great change in his parish. In his preaching he was occasionally assisted by Wesley and Whitfield, and at such times the little church proved much too small to hold the throng that poured in from the distant villages or lonely moorland hamlets, and frequently they were obliged to meet in the open air. Indeed, there was not room enough in the church even for the communicants. Mr Whitfield was once preaching in Haworth, and made use of some such expression as that he hoped there was no need to say much to this congregation, as they had sat under so pious and godly a minister for so many years. Whereupon Mr Grimshaw stood up in his place and said with a loud voice, "Oh, sir, for God's sake, do not speak so. I pray you do not flatter them. I fear the greater part of them are going to hell with their eyes open. But if they were so bound, it was not for want of exertion on Mr Grimshaw's part to prevent them." He used to preach 20 or 30 times a week in private houses. If he perceived any one inattentive to his prayers, he would stop and rebuke the offender, and not go on till he saw every one on their knees. He was very earnest in enforcing the strict observance of Sunday, and would not even allow his parishioners to walk in the fields between services. He sometimes gave out a very long psalm, tradition says the 119th, and while it was being sung, he left the reading desk, and taking a horsewhip went into the public houses and flogged the loiterers into church. They were swift who could escape the lash of the parson by sneaking out the back way. He had strong health and an active body, and rode far and wide over the hills, awakening those who had previously had no sense of religion. To save time, and be no charge to the families at whose houses he held his prayer meetings, he carried his provisions with him, all the food he took in the day on such occasions consisting simply of a piece of bread and butter, or dry bread and a raw onion. The horse races were justly objectionable to Mr Grimshaw. They attracted numbers of profligate people to Haworth, and brought a match to the combustible materials of the place, only Wales in quiet nonconformist connections in the 17th century. The first, from Thoresby, tells of cold possets, stewed prunes, cake and cheese, as being the Arvill after Oliver Heywood's funeral. The second gives, as rather shabby, according to the notion of the times, 1673, nothing but a bit of cake, draught of wine, piece of rosemary, and pair of gloves. But the Arvills at Haworth were often far more jovial doings. Among the poor, the mourners were only expected to provide a kind of spiced roll for each person, and the expense of the liquors, rum or ale, or a mixture of both, called dog's nose, was generally defrayed by each guest placing some money on a plate set in the middle of the table. Richer people would order a dinner for their friends. At the funeral of Mr Charnock, the next successor but one to Mr Grimshaw in the incumbency, above 80 people were bid to the Arvill, and the price of the feast was 4 shillings and 6pence per head, all of which was defrayed by the friends of the deceased. A few shirked their liquor. There were very frequently up and down fights before the close of the day, sometimes with the horrid additions of pausing and gouging and biting. Although I have dwelt on the exceptional traits in the characteristics of these stalwart West Ridingers, such as they were in the first quarter of this century, if not a few years later, I have little doubt that in the everyday life of the people so independent, wilful, and full of grim humour, there would be much found even at present that would shock those accustomed only to the local manners of the South, and in return I suspect the shrewd, sagacious, energetic Yorkshiremen would hold such foreigners in no small contempt. I have said it is most probable that where Haworth Church now stands, there was once an ancient field kirk or oratory. It occupied the third or lowest class of ecclesiastical structures, according to the Saxon law, and had no right of sepulture or administration of sacraments. It was so called because it was built without enclosure, and open to the adjoining fields or moors. The founder, according to the laws of Edgar, was bound, without subtracting from his tithes, to maintain the ministering priest out of the remaining 9 parts of his income. After the Reformation, the right of choosing their clergyman at any of those chapels of ease which had formerly been field kirks was vested in the freeholders and trustees, subject to the approval of the vicar of the parish. But owing to some negligence, this right has been lost to the freeholders and trustees at Haworth ever since the days of Archbishop Sharp, and the power of choosing a minister has lapsed into the hands of the vicar of Bradford. So runs the account according to one authority. Mr Brontë says, "This living has for its patrons the vicar of Bradford and certain trustees. My predecessor took the living with the consent of the vicar of Bradford, but in opposition to the trustees, in consequence of which he was so opposed that after only 3 weeks' possession he was compelled to resign." In conversing on the character of the inhabitants of the West Riding with Dr Scoresby, who had been for some time vicar of Bradford, he alluded to certain riotous transactions which had taken place at Haworth on the presentation of the living to Mr Redhead, Mr Bronte's predecessor, and said that there had been so much in the particulars indicative of the character of the people that he advised me to inquire into them. I have accordingly done so, and from the lips of some of the survivors among the actors and spectators, I have learnt the means taken to eject the nominee of the vicar. The previous incumbent next but one in succession to Mr Grimshaw had been a Mr Charnock. He had a long illness which rendered him unable to discharge his duties without assistance, and Mr Redhead came to help him as long as Mr Charnock lived. His curate gave the people much satisfaction and was highly regarded by them, but the case was entirely altered when, at Mr Charnock's death in 1819, they conceived that the trustees had been unjustly deprived of their rights by the vicar of Bradford, who appointed Mr Redhead as Perpetual Curate. The first Sunday he officiated, Haworth Church was filled even to the aisles, most of the people wearing the wooden clogs of the district. But while Mr Redhead was reading the second lesson, the whole congregation, as by one impulse, began to leave the church, making all the noise they could, with clattering and clumping of clogs, till at length Mr Redhead and the clerk were the only two left to continue the service. This was bad enough, but the next Sunday the proceedings were far worse. Then, as before, the church was well filled, but the aisles were left clear. Not a creature, not an obstacle was in the way. The reason for this was made evident about the same time in the reading of the service as the disturbances had begun the previous week. A man rode into the church upon an ass, with his face turned towards the table, slowly up the long stone street, bearing the new parson's household goods to his future abode. One wonders how the bleak aspect of her new home, the low oblong stone parsonage, yet with a still higher background of sweeping moors, struck on the gentle, delicate wife whose health even then was failing. Chapter 3. The Reverend Patrick Bronte is a native of the County Down in Ireland. His father, Hugh Bronte, was left an orphan at an early age. He came from the south to the north of the island and settled in the parish of Haworth near Loughbrickland. There was some family tradition that, humble as Hugh Bronte's circumstances were, he was the descendant of an ancient family. But about this neither he nor his descendants have cared to inquire. He made an early marriage and reared and educated 10 children on the proceeds of the few acres of land which he farmed. This large family were remarkable for great physical strength and much personal beauty. Even in his old age, Mr Brontë is a striking-looking man, above the common height, with a nobly shaped head and erect carriage. In his youth he must have been unusually handsome. He was born on Patrick Mass Day, March the 17th, 1777, and early gave tokens of extraordinary quickness and intelligence. He had also his full share of ambition, and of his strong sense and forethought. There is a proof in the fact that, knowing that his father could afford him no pecuniary aid, and that he must depend upon his own exertions, he opened a public school at the early age of 16, and this mode of living he continued to follow for 5 or 6 years. He then became a tutor in the family of the Reverend Mr Tithe, rector of Drumgooland parish. Thence he proceeded to St John's College, Cambridge, where he was entered in July 1802, being at the time 25 years of age. After nearly 4 years' residence, he obtained his B.A. degree and was ordained to a curacy in Essex, whence he removed into Yorkshire. The course of life of which this is the outline shows a powerful and remarkable character, originating and pursuing a purpose in a resolute and independent manner. Here is a youth, a boy of 16, separating himself from his family and determining to maintain himself, and that not in the hereditary manner by agricultural pursuits, but by the labour of his brain. I suppose, from what I have heard, that Mr Tighe became strongly interested in his children's tutor, and may have aided him not only in the direction of his studies, but in the suggestion of an English university education, and in advice as to the mode in which he should obtain entrance there. Mr Brontë has now no trace of his Irish origin remaining in his speech. He never could have shown his Celtic descent in the straight Greek lines and long oval of his face, but at 25, fresh from the only life he had ever known, to present himself at the gates of St John's proved no little determination of will and scorn of ridicule. While at Cambridge he became one of a corps of volunteers who were surrounded by a circular basin, commanding a magnificent view. Mr Brontë resided here for 5 years, and while the incumbent of Hartshead, he wooed and married Maria Branwell. She was the third daughter of Mr Thomas Branwell, merchant of Penzance. Her mother's maiden name was Carn, and both on father's and mother's side, the Branwell family was sufficiently well descended to enable them to mix in the best society that Penzance then afforded. Mr and Mrs Branwell would be living, their family of 4 daughters and 1 son, still children, during the existence of that primitive state of society which is well described by Dr Davy in the life of his brother. In the same town, when the population was about 2,000 persons, there was only 1 carpet, the floors of rooms were sprinkled with sea sand, and there was not a single silver fork. At that time, when our colonial possessions were very limited, our army and navy on a small scale, and there was comparatively little demand for intellect, the younger sons of gentlemen were often of necessity brought up to some trade or mechanical art to which no discredit or loss of caste, as it were, was attached. The eldest son, if not allowed to remain an idle country squire, was sent to Oxford or Cambridge, preparatory to his engaging in one of the 3 liberal professions of divinity, law, or physic. The second son was perhaps apprenticed to a surgeon or apothecary, or a solicitor, the third to a pewterer or watchmaker, the fourth to a packer or mercer, and so on, were there more to be provided for. After their apprenticeships were finished, the young men almost invariably went to London to perfect themselves in their respective trade or art, and on their return into the country, when settled in business, they were not excluded from what would now be considered genteel society. Visiting then was conducted differently from what it is at present. Dinner parties were almost unknown, excepting at the annual feast time. Christmas, too, was then a season of peculiar indulgence and conviviality, and a round of entertainments was given, consisting of tea and supper. Excepting at these 2 periods, visiting was almost entirely confined to tea parties, which assembled at 3 o'clock, broke up at 9, and the amusement of the evening was commonly some round game at cards, as Pope Joan or commerce. The lower class was then extremely ignorant, and all classes were very superstitious. Even the belief in witches maintained its ground, and there was an almost unbounded credulity respecting the supernatural and monstrous. There was scarcely a parish in the Mounts Bay that was without a haunted house, or a spot to which some story of supernatural horror was not attached. Even when I was a boy, I remember a house in the best street of Penzance, which was uninhabited because it was believed to be haunted, and which young people walked by at night at a quickened pace and with a beating heart. Amongst the middle and higher classes, there was little taste for literature, and still less for science, and their pursuits were rarely of a dignified or intellectual kind. Hunting, shooting, wrestling, cockfighting, generally ending in drunkenness, were what they most delighted in. Smuggling was carried on to a great extent, and drunkenness and a low state of morals were naturally associated with it. Whilst smuggling was the means of acquiring wealth to bold and reckless adventurers, drunkenness and dissipation occasioned the ruin of many respectable families. I have given this extract because I conceive it bears some reference to the life of Miss Brontë, whose strong mind and vivid imagination must have received their first impressions either from the servants in that simple household was older than Mrs Brontë and had lived longer among the Penzance society which Dr Davy describes. But in the Branwell family itself, the violence and irregularity of nature did not exist. They were Methodists, and as far as I can gather, a gentle and sincere piety gave refinement and purity of character. Mr Branwell, the father, according to his Descendants account, was a man of musical talent. He and his wife lived to see all their children grown up and died within a year of each other. He in 1808, she in 1809, when their daughter Maria was 25 or 26 years of age. I have been permitted to look over a series of 9 letters which were addressed by her to Mr Brontë during the brief term of their engagement in 1812. They are full of tender grace of expression and feminine modesty, pervaded by the deep piety to which I have alluded as a family characteristic. I shall make 1 or 2 extracts from them to show what sort of a person was the mother of Charlotte Brontë. But first, I must state the circumstances under which this Cornish lady met the scholar from Aherdurg near Loughbrigland. In the early summer of 1812, when she would be 29, she came to visit her uncle, the Reverend John Fennel, who was at that time a clergyman of the Church of England living near Leeds, but who had previously been a Methodist minister. Mr Brontë was the incumbent of Hartshead, and had the reputation in the neighbourhood of being a very handsome fellow, full of Irish enthusiasm, and with something of an Irishman's capability of falling easily in love. Miss Branwell was extremely small in person, not pretty, but very elegant, and always dressed with a quiet simplicity of taste, which accorded well with her general character, and of which some of the details call to mind the style of dress preferred by her daughter for her favourite heroines. Mr Brontë was soon captivated by this little gentle creature, and this time declared that it was for life. In her first letter to him, dated August the 26th, she seems almost surprised to find herself engaged, and alludes to the short time which she has known him. In the rest there are touches reminding one of Juliet's. But trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove more true than those that have more cunning to be strange. There are plans for happy picnic parties to Kirkstall Abbey in the glowing September days, when Uncle, Aunt and Cousin Jane, the last engaged to a Mr Morgan, another clergyman, were of the party, all since dead, except Mr Brontë. There was no opposition on the part of any of her friends to her engagement. Mr and Mrs Fennel sanctioned it, and her brother and sisters in far-away Penzance appear fully to have approved of it. In a letter dated September the 18th, she says, "For some years I have been perfectly my own mistress, subject to no control whatever, so far from it that my sisters, who are many years older than myself, and even my dear mother, used to consult me on every occasion of importance, and scarcely ever doubted the propriety of my opinions and actions. Perhaps you will be ready to accuse me of vanity in mentioning this, but you must consider that I do not boast of it. I have many times felt it a disadvantage, and although I thank God it has never led me into error, yet in circumstances of uncertainty and doubt I have deeply felt the want of a guide and instructor." In the same letter she tells Mr Brontë that she has informed her sisters of her engagement, and that she should not see them again so soon as she had intended. Mr Fennel, her uncle, also writes to them by the same post in praise of Mr Brontë. The journey from Penzance to Leeds in those days was sufficient for their unambitious wants. The living of Hartshead is rated in the clergy list at £202 per annum, and she was in the receipt of a small annuity, £50 I have been told, by the will of her father. So at the end of September the lovers began to talk about taking a house, for I suppose that Mr Brontë up to that time had been in lodgings, and all went smoothly and successfully with a view to their marriage in the ensuing winter, until November, when a misfortune happened which she thus patiently and prettily describes. I suppose you never expected to be much the richer for me, but I am sorry to inform you that I am still poorer than I thought myself. I mentioned having sent for my books, clothes, etc. on Saturday evening about the time when you were writing the description of your imaginary shipwreck. I was reading and feeling the effects of a real one, having then received a letter from my sister giving me an account of the vessel in which she had sent my books, being stranded on the coast of Devonshire, in consequence of which the box was dashed to pieces with the violence of the sea, and all my little property, with the exception of a very few articles, being swallowed up in the mighty deep. If this should not prove the prelude to something worse, I shall think little of it, as it is the first disastrous circumstance which has occurred since I left my home. The last of these letters is dated December the 5th. Miss Branwell and her cousin intended to set about making the wedding cake in the following week, so the marriage could not be far off. She had been learning by heart a pretty little hymn of Mr Bronte's composing, and reading Lord Littleton's advice to a lady, on which she makes some pertinent and just remarks, showing that she thought as well as read. And so Maria Branwell fades out of sight. We have no more direct intercourse with her. We hear of her as Mrs Brontë, but it is as an invalid, not far from death, still patient, cheerful, and pious. The writing of these letters is elegant and neat, while there are allusions to household occupations, such as making the wedding cake. There are also allusions to the books she has read or is reading, showing a well-cultivated mind. Without having anything of her daughter's rare talents, Mrs Brontë must have been, I imagine, that unusual character, a well-balanced and consistent woman. The style of the letters is easy and good, as is also that of a paper from the same hand entitled The Advantages of Poverty in Religious Concerns, which was written rather later with a view to publication in some periodical. She was married from her uncle's house in Yorkshire on the 29th of December 1812. The same day was also the wedding day of her younger sister, Charlotte Brontë, in distant Penzance. I do not think that Mrs Brontë ever revisited Cornwall, but she has left a very pleasant impression on the minds of those relations who yet survive. They speak of her as their favourite aunt, and one to whom they, as well as all the family, looked up as a person of talent and great amiability of disposition, and again as meek and retiring, while possessing more than ordinary talents, which she inherited from her father, and her piety was genuine and unobtrusive. Mr Brontë remained for 5 years at Hartshead, in the parish of Dewsbury. There he was married, and his 2 children, Maria and Elizabeth, were born. At the expiration of that period, he had the living of Thornton in Bradford parish. Some of those great West Riding parishes are almost like bishoprics for their amount of population and number of churches. Thornton Church is a little episcopal chapel of ease, rich in nonconformist monuments, as of accepted Lister and his friend Dr. Hall. The neighbourhood is desolate and wild, great tracts of bleak land enclosed by stone dykes sweeping up Clayton Heights. The church itself looks ancient and solitary, and as if left behind by the great stone mills of a flourishing independent firm, and the solid square chapel built by the members of that denomination. Altogether not so pleasant a place as Hort said, with its ample outlook over cloud-shadowed, sun-flecked plain, and hill rising beyond hill to form the distant horizon. Here at Thornton, Charlotte Brontë was born on the 21st of April, 1816. Fast on her heels followed Patrick Branwell, Emily Jane, and Anne. After the birth of this last daughter, Mrs Bronte's health began to decline. It is hard work to provide for the little tender wants of many young children when the means are but limited. The necessaries of food and clothing are much more easily supplied than the almost equal necessaries of attendance, care, soothing, amusement, and sympathy. Maria Brontë, the eldest of six, could only have been a few months more than 6 years old when Mr Brontë removed to Haworth on the February the 25th, 1820. Those who knew her then describe her as grave, thoughtful, and quiet, to a degree far beyond her years. Her childhood was no childhood. The cases are rare in which the possessors of great gifts have known the blessings of that careless happy time. Their unusual powers stir within them, and instead of the natural life of perception, the objective, as the Germans call it, they begin the deeper life of reflection, the subjective. Little Maria Brontë was delicate and small in appearance, which seemed to give greater effect to her wonderful precocity of intellect. She must have been her mother's companion and helpmate in many a household and nursery experience, for Mr Brontë was, of course, much engaged in his study, and besides, he was not naturally fond of children, and felt their frequent appearance on the scene as a drag, both on his wife's strength and as an interruption to the comfort of the household. Haworth Parsonage is, as I mentioned in the first chapter, an oblong stone house facing down the hill on which the village stands, and with the front door right opposite to the western door of the church, distance about 100 yards. Of this space, 20 yards or so in depth are occupied by the grassy garden, which is scarcely wider than the house. The graveyard goes around the house and garden on all sides but one. The house consists of 4 rooms on each floor, and is 2 stories high. When the Brontes took possession, they made the larger parlour to the left of the entrance the family sitting room, while that on the right was appropriated to Mr Brontë as a study. Behind this was the kitchen, behind the former a sort of flagged storeroom. Upstairs were 4 bedchambers of similar size, with the addition of a small apartment over the passage, or lobby as we call it in the north. This was to the front, the staircase going up right opposite to the entrance. There is the pleasant old fashion of window seats all through the house, and one can see that the parsonage was built in the days when wood was plentiful, as the massive stair banisters and the wainscots and the heavy window frames testify. This little extra upstairs room was appropriated to the children. Small as it was not called a nursery. Indeed, it had not the comfort of excess or dainties, the inhabitants had to go to Keighley. There were several Sunday schools. The Baptists had taken the lead in instituting them. The Wesleyans had followed. The Church of England had brought up the rear. Good Mr Grimshaw, Wesley's friend, had built a humble Methodist chapel, but it stood close to the road leading onto the moor. The Baptists then raised a place of worship with the distinction of being a few yards back from the highway, and the Methodists have since thought it well to erect another and a larger chapel, still more retired from the road. Mr Brontë was ever on kind and friendly terms with each denomination as a body, but from individuals in the village the family stood aloof, unless some direct service was required from the first. They kept themselves very close, is the account given by those who remember Mr and Mrs Bronte's coming amongst them. I believe many of the Yorkshiremen would object to the system of parochial visiting. Their surly independence would revolt from the idea of anyone having a right from his office to inquire, to counsel, or to admonish them. The old hill spirit lingers in them, which coined the rhyme inscribed on the underpart of one of the seats in the sedilia of Whaley Abbey, not many miles from Haworth. I asked an inhabitant of a district close to Haworth what sort of clergyman they had at the church which he attended. A rare good one, said he. He minds his own business, and ne'er troubles himself with ours. Mr Brontë was faithful in visiting the sick and all those who sent for him, and diligent in attendance at the schools, and so was his daughter Charlotte too, but cherishing and valuing privacy themselves, they were perhaps over-delicate in not intruding upon the privacy of others. From their first going to Haworth, their walks were directed rather out towards the heathery moors, sloping upwards behind the parsonage, than towards the long descending village street. A good old woman who came to nurse Mrs Brontë in the illness, an internal cancer, which grew and gathered upon her, not many months after her arrival in Haworth, tells me that at that time the 6 little creatures used to walk out hand in hand towards the glorious wild moors, which in after days they loved so passionately, the elder ones taking thoughtful care for the toddling wee things. They were grave and silent beyond their years, subdued probably by the presence of serious illness in the house, for at the time which my informant speaks of, Mrs Brontë was confined to the bedroom from which she never came forth alive. You would not have known there was a child in the house, they were such still, noiseless, good little creatures. Maria would shut herself up, Maria but 7, in the children's study with newspaper, and be able to tell one everything when she came out, debates in Parliament, and I don't know what all. She was good as a mother to her sisters and brother, but there never were such good children. I used to think them spiritless, they were so different to any children I had ever seen. In part, I set it down to a fancy Mr Brontë had of not letting them have flesh meat to eat. It was from no wish for saving, for there was plenty, and even waste in the house, with young servants and no mistress to see after them. But he thought that children should be brought up simply and orderly, so they had nothing but potatoes for their dinner, but they never seemed to wish for anything else. They were good little creatures. Emily was the prettiest. Mrs Brontë was the same patient, cheerful person as we have seen her formerly, very ill, suffering great pain, but seldom if ever complaining. At her better times begging her nurse to raise her in bed, to let her see her clean the grate, because she did it as it was done in Cornwall. Devotedly fond of her husband, who warmly repaid her affection, and suffered no one else to take the night nursing, but so the little things clung quietly together, for their father was busy in his study and in his parish, or with their mother, and they took their meals alone, sat reading or whispering low in the children's study, or wandered out on the hillside hand in hand. The ideas of Rousseau and Mr Day on education had filtered down through many classes and spread themselves widely out. I imagine Mr Brontë must have formed some of his opinions on the management of children from these two theorists. His practice was not half so wild or extraordinary as that to which an aunt of mine was subjected by a disciple of Mr Day's. She had been taken by this gentleman and his wife to live with them as their adopted child, perhaps about 25 years before the time of which I am writing. They were wealthy people and kind-hearted, but her food and clothing were of the very simplest and rudest description, on Spartan principles. A healthy, merry child, she did not much care for dress or eating, but the treatment which she felt as a real cruelty was this. They had a carriage in which she and the favourite dog were taken and airing on alternate days. The creature whose turn it was to be left at home being tossed in a blanket, an operation which my aunt especially dreaded. Her affright at the tossing was probably the reason why it was persevered in. Dressed-up ghosts had become common, and she did not care for them, so the blanket exercise was to be the next mode of hardening her nerves. It is well known that Mr Day broke off his intention of marrying Sabrina, the girl whom he had educated for this purpose, because, within a few weeks of the time fixed for the wedding, she was guilty of the frivolity, while on a visit from home, of wearing thin sleeves. Yet Mr Day and my aunt's relations were benevolent people, only strongly imbued with the crotchet that by a system of training might be educed the hardihood and simplicity of the ideal savage, forgetting the terrible isolation of feelings and habits which their pupils would experience in the future life which they must pass among the corruptions and refinements of civilization. Mr Brontë wished to make his children hardy and indifferent to the pleasures of eating and dress. In the latter he succeeded, as far as regarded his daughters, but he went at his object with unsparing earnestness of purpose. Mrs Bronte's nurse told me that one day, when the children had been out on the moors and rain had come on, she thought their feet would be wet, and accordingly she rummaged out some coloured boots which had been given to them by a friend, the Mr Morgan who married cousin Jane, she believes. These little pairs she ranged around the kitchen fire to warm, but when the children came back, the boots were nowhere to be found. Only a very strong odour of burnt leather was perceived. Mr Brontë had come in and seen them. They were too gay and luxurious for his children, and would foster a love of dress, so he had put them into the fire. He spared nothing that offended his antique simplicity. Long before this, someone had given Mrs Brontë a silk gown. Either the make, the colour, or the material was not according to his notions of consistent propriety, and Mrs Brontë, in consequence, never wore it. But for all that, she kept it treasured up in her drawers, which were generally locked. One day, however, while in the kitchen, she remembered that she had left the key in her drawer, and hearing Mr Brontë upstairs, she augured some ill to her dress, and running up in haste, she found it cut into shreds. His strong, passionate Irish nature was in general compressed down with resolute stoicism, but it was there notwithstanding all his philosophic calm and dignity of demeanour. He did not speak when he was annoyed or displeased, but worked off his volcanic wrath by firing pistols out of the back door in rapid succession. Mrs Brontë, lying in bed upstairs, would hear the quick explosion his anger took a different form, but still was speechless. Once he got the hearthrug and, stuffing it up the grate, deliberately set it on fire and remained in the room in spite of the stench until it had smouldered and shrivelled away into uselessness. Another time he took some chairs and sawed away at the backs till they were reduced to the condition of stools. He was an active walker, stretching away over the moors for many miles, noting in his mind all natural signs of wind and weather, and keenly observing all the wild creatures that came and went in the loneliest sweeps of the hills. He has seen eagles stooping low in search of food for their young. No eagle is ever seen on those mountain slopes now. He fearlessly took whatever side in local or national politics appeared to him right. In the days of the Luddites, he had been for the peremptory interference of the law at a time when no magistrate could be found to act, and all the property of the West Riding was in terrible danger. He became unpopular there among the mill workers, and he esteemed his life unsafe if he took his long and lonely walks unarmed. So he began the habit, which has continued to this day, of invariably carrying a loaded pistol about with him. It lay on his dressing table with his watch. With his watch it was put on in the morning. With his watch it was taken off at night. Many years later, during his residence at Haworth, there was a strike. The hands in the neighbourhood felt themselves aggrieved by the masters and refused to work. Mr Brontë thought that they had been unjustly and unfairly treated, and he assisted them by all the means in his power to keep the wolf from their doors and avoid the incubus of debt. Several of the more influential inhabitants of Haworth and the neighbourhood were mill owners. They remonstrated pretty sharply with him, but he believed that his conduct was right and persevered in it. His opinions might be often both wild and erroneous, his principles of action eccentric and strange, his views of life partial and almost misanthropical, but not one opinion that he held could be stirred or modified by any worldly motive. He acted up in his principles of action, and if any touch of misanthropy mingled with his view of mankind in general, his conduct to the individuals who came in personal contact with him did not agree with such view. It is true that he had strong and vehement prejudices and was obstinate in maintaining them, and that he was not dramatic enough in his perceptions to see how miserable others might be in a life that to him was all sufficient. But I do not pretend to be able to harmonise points of character and account for them, and bring them all into one consistent and intelligible whole. The family with whom I have now to do shot their roots down deeper than I can penetrate. I cannot measure them, much less is it for me to judge them. I have named these instances of eccentricity in the father because I hold the knowledge of them to be necessary for a right understanding of the life of his daughter. Mrs Brontë died in September 1821, and the lives of those quiet children must have become quieter and lonelier still. Charlotte tried hard in after years to recall the remembrance of her mother, and could bring back 2 or 3 pictures of her. One was when, sometime in the evening light, she had been playing with her little boy, Patrick Branwell, in the parlour of Haworth Parsonage, but the recollections of 4 or 5 years old are of very fragmentary character. Owing to some illness of the digestive organs, Mr Brontë was obliged to be very careful about his diet, and in order to avoid temptation, and possibly to have the quiet necessary for digestion, he had begun, before his wife's death, to take his dinner alone, a habit which he always retained. He did not require companionship, therefore he did not seek it, either in his walks or in his daily life. The quiet for such society as would have been natural to their age, sex, and station. There was one family residing near Haworth who had been remarkably attentive and kind to Mrs Brontë in her illness, and who had paid the children the attention of asking them occasionally to tea, and as the story connected with this family, and which I suspect dissolved their intercourse with their neighbours, made a deep impression on Charlotte's mind in her early childhood, I may as well relate it here. It will serve as a specimen of the wild stories afloat in an isolated village, for as to its truth in minor particulars I will not vouch, no more did she, the principal event having occurred when she was too young to understand its full import, and the tale having been heard, with the addition probably of the whispered exaggerations of the uneducated. The family were Dissenters, professing some rather rigid form of religion. The father was a woolen manufacturer, and moderately wealthy, at any rate. Their style of living appeared grand to the simple children who bounded their ideas by the frugal habits of the parsonage. These people had a greenhouse, the only one in the neighbourhood, a cumbrous building with more wood and wall than glass, situated in a garden which was divided from the house by the high road to Haworth. They had a large family, and one of the elder daughters was married to a wealthy manufacturer beyond Keighley. She was near her confinement when she begged that a favourite young sister might go and pay her a visit and remain with her till her baby was born. The request was complied with. The young girl, 15 or 16 years of age, went. She came home after some weeks spent in her brother-in-law's house, ill and dispirited. Inquiries were made of her by her parents, and it was discovered that she had been seduced by her sister's wealthy husband, and that the consequences of this wickedness would soon become apparent. Her angry and indignant father shut her up in her room until he could decide how to act. Her elder sisters flouted at and scorned her. Only her mother, and she was reported to be a stern woman, had some pity on her. The tale went that passers along the high road at night time saw the mother and young daughter walking in the garden, weeping, long after the household were gone to bed. Nay, more, it was whispered that they walked and wept there still when Miss Brontë told me the tale, though both had long mouldered in their graves. The wild whisperers of this story added that the cruel father, maddened perhaps by the disgrace which had fallen upon a religious family, offered a sum of money to any one who would marry his poor fallen daughter, that a husband was found who bore her away from Haworth and broke her heart, so that she died while even yet a child. Such deep, passionate resentment would have seemed not unnatural in a man who took a stern pride in his character for a religious morality, but the degrading part, after all, was this: the remaining members of the family, elder sisters even, went on paying visits at their wealthy brother-in-law's house, as if his sin was not 100-fold more scarlet than the poor young girl's, whose evil doing had been so hardly resented and so coarsely hidden. The strong feeling of the countryside still holds the descendants of this family as accursed. They fail in business, or they fail in health. At this house, I believe, the little Brontes paid their only visits, and these visits ceased before long. But the children did not want society. To small infantine gaieties they were unaccustomed. They were all in all to each other. I do not suppose that there ever was a family more tenderly bound to each other. Maria read the newspapers and reported intelligence to her younger sisters, which it is wonderful they could take an interest in, but I suspect that they had no children's books, and that their eager minds browsed undisturbed among the wholesome his last child died. There might not be many to regard the Brontes with affection, but those who once loved them long and well. I return to the father's letter. He says, "When mere children, as soon as they could read and write, Charlotte and her brother and sisters used to invent and act little plays of their own, in which the Duke of Wellington, my daughter Charlotte's hero, was sure to come off conqueror, when a dispute would not unfrequently arise amongst them regarding the comparative merits of him, Bonaparte, Hannibal, and Caesar. When the arguments got warm and rose to its height, as their mother was then dead, I had sometimes to come in as its arbitrator, and settle the dispute according to the best of my judgment. Generally, in the management of these concerns, I frequently thought that I discovered signs of rising talent, which I had seldom or never before seen in any of their age. A circumstance now occurs to my mind, which I may as well mention. When my children were very young, when, as far as I can remember, the oldest was about 10 years of age, and the youngest about 4, thinking that they knew more than I had yet discovered, in order to make them speak with less timidity, I deemed that if they were put under a sort of cover, I might gain my end, and happening to have a mask in the house, I told them all to stand and speak boldly from under cover of the mask. I began with the youngest, Anne, afterwards Acton Bell, and asked what a child like her most wanted. She answered, age and experience. I asked the next, Emily, afterwards Ellis Bell, what I had best do with her brother Branwell, who was sometimes a naughty boy. She answered, reason with him, and when he won't listen to reason, whip him. I asked Branwell what was the best way of knowing the difference between the intellects of men and women. He answered, by considering the difference between them as to their bodies. I then asked Charlotte what was the best book in the world. She answered, the Bible. And what was the next best? She answered, the book of nature. I then asked the next what was the best mode of education for a woman. She answered, that which would make her rule her house well. Lastly, I asked the oldest what was the best mode of spending time. She answered, by laying it out in preparation for a happy eternity. I may not have given precisely their words, but I have nearly done so, as they made a deep and lasting impression on my memory. The substance, however, was exactly what I have stated. The strange and quaint simplicity of the mode taken by the father to ascertain the hidden characters of his children, and the tone and character of these questions and answers, show the curious education which was made by the circumstances surrounding the Brontes. They knew no other children, they knew no other modes of thought than that was suggested to them by the fragments of clerical conversation which they overheard in the parlour, or the subjects of village and local interest which they heard discussed